You're listening to the top cheating audio stories. Enjoy your listening experience. I never thought I'd be one of those people spilling their heart out on the internet, but here I am. I'm in shock. I don't know how else to explain it. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my wife, it all feels like a lie now. My name's Ethan. I'm 36, a mechanic in a small shop just outside Springfield, Missouri. I've been married to Jessica for nearly 10 years. We have 2 kids, Sarah, who's 9, and Nathan, who's 5. I've always considered us to be your average American family. I work hard during the week, spending Saturdays under the hood of trucks and evenings at home, usually with some cold beer and whatever games on TV. Jessica works as an administrative assistant at a clinic. It's not a glamorous job, but it helps us get by. Jessica and I met when we were both in our 20s. We were younger then, full of dreams that seemed just within reach. We moved in together after only a year of dating, and marriage came not long after. For a while, things felt perfect, or at least as close to perfect as life could be. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had each other, and that seemed like enough. Our weekends used to be family time. Sundays were spent at the park with the kids, or sometimes we'd drive out to the lake. I've always loved fishing, and Sarah started to take after me in that. There was something peaceful about those times, the kids running around while Jessica and I sat by the water, talking about nothing and everything. But all of that seems like another lifetime now. For the past 6 months, Jessica has been different. It started small, little things that at the time I didn't think much of. She'd come home late from work, saying she had to stay and help with paperwork. I didn't question it at first. She'd always been responsible, and I figured work was just picking up, but it didn't stop. Soon, those late nights became more frequent. Sometimes, she'd come home after the kids had already gone to bed, too tired to do anything but mumble a half-hearted good night before disappearing into the bathroom for an hour. Our conversations became shorter, where we used to joke about stupid things like what Nathan said at preschool or how Sarah had beaten me at chess again. Now it felt like pulling teeth just to get her to tell me how her day was. She'd sit there, scrolling through her phone, her responses clipped and vague. I wasn't sure what to think. Maybe she was stressed from work, I told myself. Maybe the kids were wearing her out more than usual. I try to bring it up now and then, but she'd brush me off with a tired smile and some comment about how she just needed more sleep. The distance between us grew like a widening crack in the foundation of our house. Subtle at first, but impossible to ignore once you started looking at it closely. The most obvious sign was in bed. We used to be close in all the ways that matter, but that had changed too. Now, more often than not, she'd roll away from me at night, claiming she was too tired or had a headache. It felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find Jessica sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything all right?" She glanced at me, her eyes distant, almost like she was looking through me. "Yeah, just tired." That was her go-to response lately. Always tired, always distracted. I was starting to feel like a ghost in my own home. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I saw her phone lying on the kitchen counter. Now, I'm not the type to snoop. I've always trusted Jessica. But something inside me, a gut feeling I couldn't shake, made me pick it up, just to check, just to ease my mind. I didn't see anything at first, just the usual messages from her coworkers. But then there was one, just one, that caught my eye. A text from someone named Chris. It wasn't long or detailed. In fact, it was vague enough that I almost brushed it off. Something along the lines of, "Can't wait to see you again, Jess." I stared at that message for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. It could have been nothing. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was just a friend from work. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I knew most of her friends, and I had never heard of anyone named Chris. I confronted her the next morning while we were having breakfast. I tried to stay calm, not wanting to jump to conclusions. "Hey Jess, who's Chris?" Jessica looked up from her cereal, her eyes widening slightly. For a split second, I saw panic flash across her face, but she quickly masked it with a shrug. "Oh, he's just someone from work. We've been working on a few projects together at the clinic." "Really?" I asked, trying to sound casual, even though my gut was telling me something was off. "What kind of projects?" She hesitated, then gave a half laugh. Ethan, you're not seriously worried, are you? He's just a colleague. I can introduce you if you want. I could feel the tension in the air, but I didn't push further. I wasn't ready to accuse her of anything, not without more proof. So I let it go, at least for the moment, though the uneasiness gnawed at me for the rest of the day. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something wrong. I could feel it in the way she avoided eye contact, in the way she was suddenly so careful with her phone, keeping it close to her at all times, never leaving it unattended for more than a minute. A few nights later, Sarah, our oldest, asked me a question that hit me like a punch in the gut. We were sitting on the couch, watching TV, and out of nowhere, she turned to me and said, "Dad, why is Mommy so sad all the time?" I blinked at her, caught off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Sarah shrugged, her little face serious. "She just seems sad. She doesn't play with us like she used to, and she doesn't laugh anymore." I didn't know how to respond to that. I forced a smile and pulled her into a hug. "Mommy's just busy, Sarah. Don't worry about it." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. And I knew Sarah was right. Jessica wasn't just tired. She wasn't just stressed. She was pulling away from all of us. And I couldn't figure out why. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, listening to the sound of her quiet breathing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening, something I didn't understand yet. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself that I was overthinking it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just in my head. I couldn't let it go. After Sarah's innocent question, after the way Jessica had brushed me off about Chris, there was no denying the pit in my stomach. Something was seriously wrong, and I needed to figure out what it was before I lost my mind. It didn't help that Jessica's behavior only got stranger in the days that followed. She started dressing up more. Nothing too obvious, but just enough for me to notice. Jeans and a plain top turned into fitted dresses, a spritz of perfume, and makeup that I hadn't seen her wear in years. And every time she left the house, it was the same excuse. "I'm meeting Brittany," or "I've got to stay late at work again." I'd nod along, trying to keep my voice even as I told her to have a good time, but inside, I was fighting to keep my suspicions from boiling over. I was tired of pretending everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. It was time to talk to someone who could actually help me figure this out. So, I called my brother Mark. Mark had always been the one I could go to when I needed advice. He had served in the military for years, and something about his calm, no-nonsense demeanor always grounded me. We didn't talk as often as we used to, but I knew he'd pick up the phone if I needed him. When I told him what was going on, he didn't sound surprised. "Ethan, man, I hate to say it, but you've got to keep your eyes open," he said, his voice steady. "If something's going on, she's not going to hand it to you. You'll have to dig a little." I didn't like the idea of snooping on Jessica, but the alternative, sitting around and doing nothing, was worse. "What do you mean by dig?" "Check her phone when you can. Watch her behavior. Don't confront her until you know for sure. But don't ignore this. You've got kids, man. You need to know what's happening." It felt wrong, violating that trust, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to protect myself, protect my family. Mark was right. If I just asked Jessica again, she'd brush me off or give me another excuse. I needed proof before I could confront her. The next evening, after Jessica went upstairs to shower, I saw my chance. She had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. It wasn't hard. I knew her passcode. I told myself I was just going to look quickly, enough to ease my mind or confirm what I already suspected. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There in her messages was a thread with Chris. This time, there was no vague "can't wait to see you" message. No, it was a lot worse than that. Page after page of texts, some dating back months. They were talking about everything. Our marriage, my flaws, her unhappiness. But the worst part was the way they talked about a future together. As if it was some fantasy they'd both been feeding into. "You deserve someone who makes you feel alive, Jess. He doesn't appreciate you like I would. I think about what it would be like, you, me, no secrets. Just us. It's what you want, right? God, I can't stand it anymore. Every time I'm with him, I just think about you." My chest tightened, my breath coming short. It wasn't just an emotional affair. They were talking about leaving their lives behind, about making plans. This wasn't some harmless flirtation. It was real. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, but I didn't make a sound. I couldn't let Jessica know I'd found out. Not yet. I needed time to think, to figure out what I was going to do. Slamming the phone down in front of her, demanding an explanation wouldn't fix anything. And I wasn't ready to tear my family apart just yet. I quickly put the phone back on the counter where I'd found it, my mind racing with what I had just read. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind to it? That night, I couldn't sleep. Jessica curled up next to me like everything was fine, like she wasn't lying to my face every day. I stared at the ceiling, going over every conversation we'd had, every late night she'd spent away from home. I replayed all the signs I'd ignored, all the moments I hadn't pushed her for the truth. I should have known better. The next day, I called Mark again. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't overreacting. You were right, I told him. I found messages. It's worse than I thought. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind that told me Mark wasn't surprised. What did they say? They're talking about a future together. They've been planning. I don't even know how long this has been going on, but it's serious. Mark's voice was calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. You've got to stay smart about this, Ethan. Don't let her know you know. Not yet. Gather everything you can. Get your ducks in a row before you make any decisions. Yeah, I know. I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything's okay. You got to think about the kids. Whatever happens, you've got to make sure they're protected. He was right, of course. Sarah and Nathan didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. I had to play this carefully for their sake. A few days passed. I tried to act normal around Jessica, even though I felt like I was walking around with a ticking time bomb inside me. I went through the motions, work, dinner, helping the kids with their homework, but all I could think about were those messages. Then, one afternoon, I got a text. It wasn't from Jessica or Mark. It was from Brittany. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe she was checking in, or maybe Jessica had asked her to reach out. But when I opened the message, I realized it wasn't meant for me. It was meant for Jessica. You think he knows? He's been acting weird lately. Just don't let him catch you, babe. It's not worth it if he finds out before you're ready. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Brittany knew. She'd known the whole time. And she hadn't just known, she had been encouraging it, helping Jessica hide it from me. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. Jessica's affair wasn't just some secret between her and Chris. It was something Brittany had been involved in too. The betrayal ran deeper than I thought. I didn't text Brittany back. Instead, I saved the message, a part of me already beginning to plan what I would do next. I was done playing nice. I needed to know just how far this went, and I needed to make sure Jessica couldn't wriggle her way out of it when I confronted her. It was time. I couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep acting like everything was normal when I knew exactly what was going on behind my back. The weight of it had been pressing on me all week, and I'd finally reached the breaking point. I had to confront her, to lay everything out in the open. No more secrets, no more lies. I waited until the kids were asleep. Sarah had been chatty that night, asking me about her upcoming school project and whether we could take a trip to the library that weekend. Nathan had fallen asleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. I lingered in their rooms longer than usual, letting their innocence calm me before I faced what I had to do downstairs. Jessica was in the living room, her legs tucked under her on the couch, watching some mindless TV show. She barely looked up when I entered, like I was just part of the background noise now. I stood there for a second, taking in the sight of her. It was strange how familiar everything was. Her in that old sweatshirt she always wore, the one she'd had since college, the same throw blanket she curled up with every night. And yet, everything felt foreign, like I was looking at a stranger sitting in my house. Jessica, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk. She finally glanced up at me, eyes narrowing slightly. What about? I didn't sit down. I stood there, feeling the tension building between us like a wall. About Chris. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Panic? Guilt? It was there for a split second before she masked it with indifference. What about him? I know, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I know everything. She blinked, clearly thrown off by my directness. Ethan, what are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, opening the folder where I'd saved the screenshots of the texts. I walked over and handed it to her, not saying anything as she stared down at the screen. For a moment, she didn't react, just scrolling through the messages in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I crossed my arms, keeping my tone calm, even though I felt anything but. "Because it looks like you've been talking to another man behind my back for months, telling him things about our marriage, talking about a future with him, making plans." Jessica set the phone down on the coffee table, her hand trembling slightly. "I can explain." I stared at her, waiting. I didn't say anything, just letting the weight of the silence force her to continue. She sighed, rubbing her hands over her face. "It's not what you think. Yes, I've been talking to Chris. Yes, it's been emotional. But it's never been physical, Ethan. I swear to you, nothing happened." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd read, this was the excuse she was going with? "So, I'm supposed to believe you've just been having these deep, emotional conversations with him, talking about how unhappy you are with me, talking about leaving me, and none of it meant anything?" Jessica's eyes flashed with anger. "That's not what I said. Don't twist this around. I'm not twisting anything. You're the one who's been lying to me." She stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't want to hurt me? You've been sneaking around with another man. Jessica, how exactly did you think this would play out?" Her face hardened, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But instead, she surprised me. She turned the tables, her voice rising with frustration. "What about you, Ethan? Do you think I've been happy? Do you think I haven't noticed how distant you've been, how little attention you've given me?" I blinked, taken aback. "What are you talking about? I've been here, every day with you with the kids." "No, you haven't." Her voice was sharp now, her anger building. "You're always so focused on work, on the kids, on your own hobbies. When was the last time you actually paid attention to me? When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? It's like I don't even exist to you anymore." I stared at her, my chest tightening with frustration. "So, that's your excuse? I haven't been attentive enough, so you turn to some guy from work? That's how you solve our problems?" "You don't get it," she snapped, taking a step toward me. "It wasn't about him. It was about me. I needed to feel something again. I needed to feel like I mattered. By throwing our marriage away?" She shook her head, her expression softening slightly, almost pleading now. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't plan any of this. I was just lonely, Ethan." And Chris, he listened. He made me feel like I was important again. I felt the anger draining out of me, replaced by a cold sense of disbelief. "So, what now? You're just going to keep talking to him? Keep sneaking around behind my back?" Jessica hesitated, then shook her head. No, I'll end it. I promise. I don't want to lose you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just some horrible mistake, some passing phase. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me the whole truth. "End it? Just like that?" She nodded, her eyes shining with what I couldn't tell was guilt or desperation. "Yes. I'll text him tonight. I'll tell him it's over." I didn't say anything for a long moment, my mind racing. "I want you to do it in front of me," I said finally, my voice low. Jessica's face paled. "What? If you're serious about ending it, you'll call him right now. In front of me. No excuses, no lies. I need to hear it." She opened her mouth to protest, but then closed it, swallowing hard. "Ethan, it's not that simple. I can't just cut him off without closure." "Closure?" The word felt like a slap. "What kind of closure are you looking for?" Jessica rubbed her temples, clearly flustered. I need to see him one more time. To explain. To end things properly." The knot in my stomach tightened. I should have seen this coming. "So, you're telling me you need to be alone with him? After everything?" "I swear, Ethan, it's just to end it. I need to do this for myself." I shook my head, taking a step back. "No, you don't get to make that decision anymore. If he's so important to you, then pack a bag and go stay with him. But don't expect me to sit here and wait while you get your closure." Her eyes widened, tears welling up. "Ethan, no, please don't say that. I don't want to leave. I want to fix this." "You want to fix this by spending more time with the guy you've been betraying me with? You're asking for too much, Jessica." She stood there, looking lost for a moment. Then her expression hardened again. You're being unreasonable. I let out a bitter laugh. Unreasonable? I've been patient. I've given you every chance to come clean, to be honest with me, and now you're standing here asking me for another chance to lie to my face. Jessica's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know what I'm doing. I stood there, watching her crumble, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel anything. This woman standing in front of me wasn't the Jessica I had married. I didn't know who she was anymore. I'll tell him it's over, she said finally, her voice trembling. I'll do it in front of you. I'll show you. But I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it anymore. Something inside me had already broken, something that couldn't be fixed with a simple phone call. I nodded, but the decision was already forming in the back of my mind. This wasn't going to end with a few promises and some apologies. Sarah's birthday was coming up, and for once, things felt almost normal again. The tension between Jessica and me had eased, at least on the surface. After our confrontation, she had promised to cut things off with Chris. I watched her send the text, watched her delete his number from her phone. She seemed genuinely sorry, and part of me wanted to believe that maybe we could fix this. Maybe this was the beginning of something better. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The party was supposed to be a small, simple gathering. Just family, a few friends, nothing crazy. Sarah wanted a backyard party with some games, pizza, and a cake shaped like a unicorn. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her eyes light up, and that's all that mattered to me. I figured it would be a good way to keep the peace, to show the kids that we were still a family, even if things were a little rocky between their mom and me. The day of the party was perfect, sunny, but not too hot, the kind of day that made you want to sit outside with a cold beer and pretend everything was fine. I was doing just that, sipping a drink and watching Sarah run around with a group of her friends, when I saw him. Chris. I blinked, thinking maybe I was imagining things. But no, there he was, standing by the grill, chatting with a couple of the other guests like he belonged there. I felt my stomach drop, the anger bubbling up so fast I almost couldn't control it. I looked over at Jessica. She was standing with Brittany, pretending like nothing was out of the ordinary, but I could see the tension in her posture. Her eyes flicked toward me, and when they met mine, I saw the flash of guilt. She hadn't told me he was coming. She hadn't even warned me. She was just going to let him show up like it was no big deal. I set my beer down and made my way over to her, trying to keep my voice steady. Jessica, what the hell is he doing here? Her face went pale. Ethan, please, just... No. I snapped, cutting her off. You told me it was over. You said you were done with him. I am, she insisted, her voice low so no one would hear. I didn't invite him. He just showed up. And you didn't think to ask him to leave? I shot back, my anger barely contained. Before she could answer, Chris sauntered over, a smug grin on his face. Hey, Ethan. Great party, man. Sarah looks like she's having a blast. I clenched my jaw, every muscle in my body screaming for me to knock that grin right off his face. What are you doing here, Chris? He shrugged, completely unfazed. Jessica invited me. She said it'd be cool if I came by, gave Sarah her present. We're friends, right? I turned to Jessica, my eyes burning into her. Friends? She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Chris, meanwhile, seemed to enjoy every second of this. He stepped a little closer, lowering his voice just enough that only I could hear him. You really think it's over? That she just ended it because you asked her to? Come on, Ethan. You're smarter than that. I felt my control slipping. The calm exterior I'd been struggling to maintain cracking under the weight of his arrogance. You need to leave, I said through gritted teeth. Chris ignored me, turning his attention to Jessica. You tell him the truth yet? Or are we still pretending? Jessica looked like she was about to cry, her eyes darting between us, her voice barely above a whisper. Chris, stop. Stop, he laughed, shaking his head. Why? This is what you wanted, right? You said you were tired of hiding. I took a step toward him, my fists clenched, but before I could do something I'd regret, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Mark, let it go, Mark said quietly. This isn't the time. I glanced around. He was right. Sarah and her friends were still running around, oblivious to the storm brewing on the other side of the yard. I couldn't cause a scene. Not here. Not today. Chris grinned, clearly enjoying the power he held in that moment. See you around, Ethan, he said, giving me a mocking salute before turning and walking off toward the house. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to do. But I couldn't. Not in front of the kids. Mark's grip tightened on my shoulder. Come on, he said quietly. Let's talk. I followed him away from the party, my chest still heaving with barely suppressed rage. We stopped by the fence, out of earshot from everyone else. Mark turned to face me, his expression serious. You can't let him get to you like that. I know, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. But I don't know how much more of this I can take. He's so goddamn smug and Jessica's. I don't even know who she is anymore. Mark nodded, his face set in that calm, controlled way that had always made him a rock in times of chaos. I get it, but you've got to stay smart, Ethan. If you lose your cool now, he wins. She wins. What am I supposed to do? I asked, my voice cracking with frustration. She promised me it was over. She looked me in the eye and said she'd end it. And now he's here, throwing it in my face. Mark crossed his arms, leaning against the fence. You need to take control of the situation before it spirals any further. This isn't just about you and Jessica anymore. It's about the kids. You need to think long-term, and that means keeping a level head no matter how hard it gets. I nodded, trying to calm myself down. Mark was right, of course. He always was. But it didn't make it any easier to swallow the fact that Chris had just strutted into my house, into my life, and acted like he belonged there. And worse, Jessica had let it happen. Look, Mark said, his voice softer now. I'm not saying you shouldn't be pissed. You've got every right to be. But if you let them see that, it gives them the upper hand. Stay cool. Make your moves when the time is right. I exhaled slowly, nodding again. Yeah, you're right. I'll keep it together. Good, Mark said, clapping me on the back. Now go back in there, smile for the kids, and deal with this later. I took a deep breath and forced a smile, pushing the anger down into the pit of my stomach where it belonged. For now, at least, I wasn't going to let Chris or Jessica ruin Sarah's day. I walked back to the party, plastering a smile on my face as I watched the kids play. Jessica hovered by the edge of the yard, keeping her distance. I didn't go to her. I couldn't even look at her. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I kept my focus on Sarah, helping her blow out her candles, making sure she had the best time possible. But every time I caught a glimpse of Chris out of the corner of my eye, that anger flared up again, hot and uncontrollable. After the party ended and the last of the guests had left, I went back inside to find Jessica in the kitchen, cleaning up. I couldn't avoid her any longer. We need to talk, I said, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't look at me, her hands busy scrubbing dishes that were already clean. I didn't invite him, Ethan. I swear. But you didn't stop him from coming, I shot back. You didn't do anything when he showed up. I didn't want to cause a scene, she muttered, finally turning to face me. It's Sarah's birthday. What was I supposed to do? Tell him to leave in front of everyone. Yes, I said flatly. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. Jessica let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. I stepped closer, my voice low. You lied to me, Jess. You promised me it was over. And then he shows up here, acting like everything's fine. What the hell am I supposed to think? I didn't lie, she whispered. I ended it. I told him it was over. Then why is he still here? I asked, my voice rising. Why is he still acting like you're together? Why is he so damn comfortable around you, around me, around our kids? I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know why he's acting like this. But I swear, Ethan, I'm not lying to you. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was all just some horrible misunderstanding. But after everything that had happened, how could I? I need time to think, I said finally, my voice tight. She didn't say anything as I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the weight of everything crashing down on me all at once. Chris's smug grin, Jessica's excuses, Mark's warnings, they all swirled in my head, and I knew that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I knew what I had to do. After the disaster at Sarah's birthday, the lies, and the constant back and forth, I had finally reached my breaking point. There was no going back now. I had tried, God knows I had tried, to make this work, to give Jessica a chance to come clean, to end things with Chris. But every time I gave her an inch, she took a mile. I couldn't keep living like this. Mark had warned me from the start. Get everything in order, Ethan. Protect yourself. And that's exactly what I had done. Over the past few weeks, I've been meeting with a lawyer, going over everything, assets, custody arrangements, the house, the kids. I had hoped I wouldn't need to go through with it, that Jessica would prove me wrong, that somehow we could save our marriage. But now, after everything, I knew the truth. It was over. I had the divorce papers drawn up, everything ready. I sat in the lawyer's office that morning, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders but not unbearable. In a strange way, it felt like relief, like finally cutting the cord that had been strangling me for months. I signed the papers and took them home. Jessica was out when I got there, probably with Brittany or running some errands for the kids. It didn't matter. I walked into the kitchen, the sound of the clock ticking in the silence of the house. Everything was neat, normal, almost like none of this had ever happened, almost like we were still just a regular family. But we weren't. I set the divorce papers on the counter, right where I knew she'd see them when she got back. It felt like the last act of a play that had gone on too long, the final line in a script I hadn't written but had been forced to perform. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. I was upstairs, packing a bag when I heard the front door open. Jessica's footsteps were light at first, her usual routine of dropping her purse on the table and heading to the fridge. I waited for the inevitable, waited for the moment she'd see the papers. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then a gasp. Ethan? Her voice was shaky, filled with confusion. What is this? I came downstairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the kitchen, she was standing by the counter, the divorce papers clutched in her hands like they were burning her. What is this? She asked again, her eyes wide, panic already creeping into her voice. It's what you think it is, I said quietly, standing across from her, the kitchen island between us like a barrier I didn't want to cross. Her hands shook as she stared at the papers, then back at me. You're filing for divorce? I nodded, my voice steady. I can't do this anymore, Jess. Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she was going to break down right then and there. But she didn't. Instead, she dropped the papers onto the counter and took a step toward me, her hands outstretched as if she could somehow physically stop what was already set in motion. No, Ethan. Please. We can fix this. We can. We've tried. I cut her off, my tone firmer than I expected. I've tried, but this has gone too far. I can't trust you anymore. I'm sorry, she cried, her voice rising. I swear, Ethan, I'll cut him off for good. I'll never speak to him again. Just please don't do this. Don't tear our family apart. I shook my head, my heart hardening. You tore it apart, Jess. The minute you let Chris into our lives, you did this. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but it didn't move me like it once would have. I'd seen this before. The regret, the apologies, the promises to change. But nothing ever changed. The lies only grew bigger, the secrets deeper. I never loved him, she sobbed, stepping closer to me. I never loved Chris. I was lonely. I felt neglected. You were always so busy, so focused on everything else but me. I needed to feel wanted again. But it didn't mean anything, Ethan. I swear, it didn't mean anything. I stared at her, the words bouncing off me like they were spoken in another language. Didn't mean anything? Jess, you've been lying to me for months. You let him come into our home. You let him be around our kids. How is any of that supposed to mean nothing? She shook her head violently, her hands grabbing at mine, desperate. I was stupid. I know I was, but I'll end it. For real this time. I'll block his number. I'll quit my job if I have to. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan. Just please, don't do this. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this time she meant it, but I couldn't. Not anymore. It's too late, Jess, I said, my voice soft but final. I'm done. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me like she didn't recognize the person in front of her. Then something in her snapped. "You're really doing this?" she hissed, her voice turning sharp, venomous. "You're really going to throw everything away? Over one mistake?" "One mistake?" I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "This wasn't a mistake, Jess. This was a choice. A choice you made over and over again. And now you're finally facing the consequences." She glared at me, her eyes flashing with anger. "Fine. You want to leave? You want to be the big man and walk away from your family? Go ahead. But you should know something first." I frowned, unsure where this was going. "What are you talking about?" She took a step back, folding her arms across her chest, a smug look creeping onto her tear-streaked face. "I'm pregnant." The room seemed to tilt beneath me, my heart pounding in my ears. "What?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated, her voice cold now. "And before you ask, yes, it's yours." I stared at her, the words swirling around in my head, not making sense. You're pregnant?" She nodded, her lips twisting into a cruel smile. "That's right. So, if you think you can just walk away, think again. You're going to have to deal with me for the rest of your life." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Pregnant. She was pregnant. But how could I even believe her? After all the lies, after everything she had hidden from me, how could I be sure? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "How do I know it's mine?" Her eyes widened with fury. "Are you serious? You think I'd lie about something like this? I don't know what you're capable of anymore, Jessica." I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. "After everything that's happened, how am I supposed to trust you?" She looked like I had slapped her, her mouth falling open in shock. "You're unbelievable. I've already told you the truth about Chris. I've told you everything. And now you're accusing me of lying about this." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind was spinning, trying to process what she had just dropped on me. Pregnant. Jessica's face twisted in anger. "You want a paternity test, Ethan? Fine. I'll give you one. But it's not going to change anything. You're still going to be tied to me. You're still going to have to deal with this." The weight of it all crushed down on me, but there was a strange clarity in it, too. A realization that, no matter what happened next, I couldn't go back. I had already made my choice, and nothing, no pregnancy, no lies was going to change that. I looked her in the eye, my voice calm. "Get the test. But either way, this marriage is over." She stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief, fury, and something else, something like fear. For the first time, I think she realized I wasn't coming back. That this time I meant it. I turned and walked away, the sound of her ragged breathing following me as I headed back upstairs to finish packing my things. I didn't sleep that night. After Jessica dropped the bombshell that she was pregnant, my mind was a whirlwind of anger, doubt, and confusion. I kept replaying the last few months in my head, trying to make sense of how we'd gotten to this point, but nothing lined up. Nothing made sense anymore. The next morning, I went downstairs to find Jessica already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in front of her, staring at the papers I'd left on the counter the day before. She didn't look up when I walked in, but I knew she was waiting for me to say something. "I want a paternity test," I said flatly, not bothering with any pleasantries. There was no point in pretending anymore. Jessica flinched, her grip tightening around the mug. "Ethan, I told you the baby is yours." "I don't care what you told me," I shot back. "I'm not taking your word for it. We're getting the test." She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hurt and anger. "You really think I'd lie about something like this? After everything?" "I don't know what you'd lie about anymore," I said coldly. "You've already lied about Chris. You've lied about where you've been, what you've done. How am I supposed to trust you on this?" She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. The silence between us stretched, thick and tense. She knew I wasn't backing down. "Fine," she muttered, pushing her chair back and standing up. "We'll get the test, but it's not going to change anything." "You're right about that," I said, my voice low. "It won't change anything between us." The days that followed were a blur of appointments and lawyers. Jessica agreed to the paternity test, but it took time to arrange. In the meantime, I moved forward with the divorce. There was no going back now, and every time I looked at her, I felt that certainty solidify even more. Mark was there every step of the way. He was the one who kept me grounded, reminding me to focus on what mattered: the kids. Sarah and Nathan didn't know what was happening yet. We hadn't told them about the divorce, hadn't explained why things were tense between their mom and me. But soon, they would need to know, and that thought haunted me more than anything else. Finally, the day of the paternity test results came. I had tried to prepare myself for whatever the outcome might be, telling myself that, either way, my decision was made. But the truth was I was terrified. I didn't know what I would do if the baby was mine. I didn't know how I'd handle being tied to Jessica for the rest of my life. The call came in the middle of the afternoon. Jessica and I sat across from each other in the lawyer's office, the tension between us suffocating. She didn't say a word as the lawyer handed me the envelope with the test results. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking as I pulled out the paper inside. My eyes scanned the words, and then I saw it. Negative. The baby wasn't mine. I felt the breath leave my body, a mix of relief and devastation washing over me all at once. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized what the test had confirmed. Ethan, she started, her voice trembling. Don't, I said, cutting her off before she could even begin. Don't say another word. She sat there, her eyes wide and filled with tears, but I couldn't find it in me to care anymore. Whatever pity or sympathy I might have had for her was gone. All I could feel was the overwhelming sense of betrayal, the confirmation that every single thing she'd told me had been a lie. You told me the baby was mine, I said, my voice cold and even. You tried to use it to manipulate me, to keep me tied to you. Jessica shook her head frantically, her tears spilling over. I didn't know, Ethan. I swear I thought. I don't care what you thought, I snapped, standing up from the table, my hands clenched in a fist at my sides. You've lied to me enough. This is over. The room was silent, except for Jessica's soft sobs. The lawyer sat there, stone-faced, waiting for me to make my move. I turned and walked out of the office without looking back. Over the next few weeks, everything fell apart for Jessica. The divorce moved forward, and with the paternity test confirming that the baby wasn't mine, the custody battle shifted in my favor. I filed for full custody of Sarah and Nathan, determined to protect them from the chaos their mother had brought into our lives. Jessica didn't fight it as hard as I expected. After the test results came back, it was like something inside her broke. She stopped trying to argue, stopped pretending she could fix things. Chris had disappeared from her life, whether he left because of the baby or because he realized he didn't want to deal with the mess he'd created. I didn't know, and I didn't care. All I knew was that Jessica was alone now, left to face the consequences of her actions. Her friends, the ones who had supported her throughout the affair, started to distance themselves too. Even Brittany stopped coming around. It didn't take long for Jessica's world to crumble, and as much as I hated her for what she'd done, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for her. But that pity didn't change anything. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had moved into a new house, a small place with a yard for the kids to play in, just a few miles away from the old one. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was a fresh start. Mark helped me move in, and once we'd unpacked the last of the boxes, he handed me a beer and clapped me on the shoulder. You did it, man, he said, smiling. You made it through. I nodded, taking a sip of the beer, feeling the weight of everything slowly lifting off my shoulders. Yeah, I did. Sarah and Nathan were adjusting to the new routine. It wasn't easy. There were tears, there were questions. But we got through it. They spent time with Jessica on weekends, but it was clear that things weren't the same between them. They could sense the distance, the change in her, and as much as I tried to shield them from it, I knew they would have to come to terms with it in their own way. One evening, after dinner, I sat in the backyard watching Sarah and Nathan chase each other around the grass, their laughter filling the air. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. I had been through hell, betrayed, lied to, manipulated, but I had made it out the other side. And as I watched my kids play, I realized that, despite everything, I had something worth fighting for. I had my family, I had my future, and I was free. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.